The courtroom is silent when Kody Brown finally stands, his hands shaking, not from anger, but from fear. Because for the first time in his life, all four wives are no longer sitting behind him. They're sitting across from him. What begins as a legal hearing quietly turns into a public unmasking of secrets the Brown family spent decades hiding. And before this day ends, one sentence spoken under oath will change the sister wives' story forever. If you've ever wondered what really happened behind the cameras, stay till the end and tell me in the comments whose side you're on before the truth is revealed. The courtroom doesn't look dramatic at first glance. Pale wooden benches, beige walls, a faint hum from the air conditioning that never quite cools the room. But tension doesn't need color. It needs people. And today, this room is packed with it. Kody Brown sits at the defense table, his shoulders stiff, his jaw clenched so tight it looks like it might crack. His signature curls are pulled back, but they don't hide the stress etched into his face. He avoids eye contact with the gallery, staring instead at a single scratch on the table, as if it's the only thing keeping him grounded. Across the aisle, Christine sits upright, calm on the surface, but her fingers tremble as they grip a folded tissue. She isn't crying, not yet. She's past that stage. Her pain has hardened into resolve. Beside her, Janelle leans back slightly, arms crossed, eyes sharp, watching Kody the way someone watches a storm they've already survived. Mary sits alone, not next to Kody, not beside Robin, just alone. And then there's Robin. Robin sits closest to the aisle, dabbing her eyes, already emotional, before a single word has been spoken. Her lips quiver, and she keeps glancing toward Kody, silently begging him to look back. He doesn't. The judge enters. Everyone rises. The sound of chairs scraping the floor echoes like a warning shot. As everyone sits again, the judge's voice is steady, almost too calm for what's about to unfold. This case officially is about financial disputes, custody considerations, and allegations of emotional abandonment. Unofficially, it's about something much bigger. It's about power. It's about control. It's about control. It's about who gets to tell the real story. The prosecution begins with a simple sentence. This court will hear testimony regarding years of emotional manipulation, unequal treatment, and financial coercion within a plural marriage household. Kody finally looks up. His eyes flick toward Christine for half a second, then Janelle, then Mary. He swallows hard. The first witness is called, but before anyone even reaches the stand, the tension spikes. Because everyone knows this isn't just about legal arguments. This is about decades of silence being broken, one by one. Christine's mind drifts despite herself. She remembers the early days, the laughter, the belief that this family was built on faith and fairness. She remembers defending Kody to friends, to critics, to herself. And she remembers the exact moment that belief cracked. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't an affair. It was indifference. She glances at him now, wondering if he even remembers the promises he made. And here's the moment that makes viewers lean closer, because the cracks you're seeing didn't happen overnight. They were quietly growing for years. The attorney's voice pulls everyone back to the present. Christine is called to the stand. She stands slowly. The room feels warmer as she walks forward, every step heavy with history. When she raises her right hand to swear an oath, her voice doesn't shake. She's past fear. What she feels now is relief. Relief that she finally gets to speak. The first questions are gentle. Background, marriage timeline, children. But then the tone changes. Mrs. Brown, the attorney asks, "Did you feel emotionally supported by your husband during the final years of your marriage?" Christine pauses. Not for drama, but for honesty. "No," she says. One word, clean, sharp. A murmur ripples through the gallery. She explains how attention became conditional, how affection turned into currency, how disagreement meant distance, not just emotionally, but physically. She describes nights spent alone while knowing Kody was present somewhere else, choosing someone else. Robin lowers her head. Kody stares straight ahead, expression unreadable. Christine's voice grows steadier as she speaks, stronger with every sentence. This isn't just testimony, it's release. Then comes the question that shifts the room. Did you believe the marriage structure was fair? Christine almost laughs. Almost. No, she says. I believed it was supposed to be, but it never was. This is where the story stops being about a TV family and starts feeling uncomfortably real for anyone who's ever felt invisible in a relationship. The defense cross-examines. They try to frame Christine as emotional, as resentful, as someone who simply couldn't handle plural marriage. But Christine doesn't bite. I handled it, she says calmly. What I couldn't handle was being erased. That lands harder than any accusation. When she steps down, Janelle meets her eyes. No words, just a nod. Respect. Next is Janelle herself. Where Christine is emotional clarity, Janelle is quiet calculation. She speaks about finances, shared accounts, unequal spending, decisions made without consensus. She doesn't accuse. She documents. Receipts, dates, numbers. Kody shifts in his seat for the first time. Janelle describes feeling less like a partner and more like a resource. Someone who contributed stability without receiving security in return. It felt, she says, choosing her words carefully, like loyalty was expected but not reciprocated. Right here, viewers realize this isn't about love versus hate. It's about imbalance, and imbalance always leaves a trail. Mary is last, and when her name is called, the room changes. Mary walks slowly, as if each step carries a question she still hasn't answered herself. She sits, folds her hands, and stares straight ahead. Her testimony is different. She doesn't attack. She doesn't defend. She confesses. She talks about isolation, about staying too long because leaving felt like failure, about loving someone who had already emotionally moved on. And for the first time, Kody's face cracks. Just slightly, but it's there. Robin watches, tears streaming now, no longer performative, just raw. Because Mary says something no one expects. I stayed, she says softly, because I was afraid that if I left, I'd finally have to admit I was never chosen. Silence. No murmurs, no shifting. Just silence. This is the line that makes people pause the video, because it hits a truth that doesn't belong to just one family. The judge calls a recess. Everyone stands, but no one moves. Kody finally turns toward Robin. Their eyes meet, for the first time all day. And in that look is a question neither of them wants to answer. Because when court resumes, the next testimony won't come from a wife. It will come from someone who knows where the money went. And why. As Kody exhales shakily, one thought pounds in his mind louder than any gavel. What if this time he can't talk his way out? The courtroom feels different when everyone returns from recess. Heavier somehow, as if the air itself has learned what was said and decided to hold on to it. And when Kody Brown walks back to his seat, his confidence hasn't returned with him. Instead, it's left behind somewhere in the hallway, where the echoes of Mary's words are still ringing. And this time when he sits, he doesn't look at Robin. He doesn't look at anyone. because the next phase of this case isn't about feelings anymore. It's about facts, numbers, decisions made in private rooms while cameras were off, and the judge barely finishes calling the court back to order before the prosecution stands and announces the next witness, a former family accountant, a man who once knew the Browns' finances better than some of the wives themselves. And the moment his name is spoken, Janelle's posture straightens just a little, because this is the part she's been waiting for. The part where years of quiet frustration finally get a voice that can't be dismissed as emotion or bitterness. And as the accountant takes the stand, adjusts his glasses, and clears his throat, the room seems to lean toward him, because everyone understands that money tells stories people don't. And the attorney begins gently, asking about his role, how long he worked with the family, what his responsibilities were. And the man answers calmly, professionally, explaining how funds from the show were distributed, how household budgets were structured, how decisions were often centralized, despite the family's public claim of equality. And with every sentence, Kody's leg bounces faster. Beneath the table, period. We will go into other periods often, period. We will go into other periods often, period, 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 period. Because this is no longer something he can spin with charm or faith-based language. This is paperwork. This is trail and trace. And then the question drops, simple but devastating, asking whether all wives had equal access to family funds. And the accountant pauses, not for drama, but because he wants to be precise. And when he finally speaks, his words land like a dropped plate in a silent room, saying no, not consistently. And that pause, before he explains, feels endless, because in that silence, viewers feel the weight of every argument that ever ended with "we'll talk about it later." And he goes on to describe how certain expenses were approved faster than others, how some households were protected from financial strain, while others were asked to be patient. And the camera in the mind of the listener cuts to Janelle, who exhales slowly, as if hearing confirmation of something she always knew, but was told she was imagining. And the attorney presses further, asking if there were instances where one wife's needs were prioritized over others without group discussion. And the accountant nods, flipping through a folder, referencing dates and amounts, and suddenly Robin's quiet sniffles stop, because this isn't about emotion anymore. This is about evidence. And Kody finally looks up, his voice sharp when his attorney objects, claiming relevance. But the judge overrules it smoothly, because relevance is no longer a question here. It's the foundation. And when the accountant mentions a large purchase approved during a time another wife was struggling to pay basic household expenses, the room reacts, not loudly, but with a collective tightening. And strong. This is the moment the audience realizes the story they were shown on television was only half-lit, the rest happening in shadows. And the prosecution pivots, asking about decision-making authority, and the accountant explains that while Kody often spoke of consensus, the final calls were almost always his, sometimes aligned with one wife's preferences more than others. And Christine's jaw tightens, because this matches the memory she's carried quietly for years, the feeling of being overruled without being heard. And then comes the question no one is ready for, asking whether any wife ever raised concerns about financial fairness directly. And the accountant answers yes, more than once. And when asked who, he names Janelle, and Kody's head snaps toward her instinctively, as if surprised she dared to put it in writing. And Janelle meets his look calmly, unflinching, because this is no longer about pleasing anyone. It's about truth. And the accountant describes emails, meetings, warnings that imbalance would create resentment, instability, fracture. And this is where the tension sharpens, because viewers sense how close disaster always was. And when cross-examination begins, Kody's attorney tries to frame the accountant as an outsider, someone who didn't understand the family's values. But the man doesn't rise to the bait, explaining that his job wasn't to judge belief systems. It was to track numbers. And numbers don't believe in fairness. They only record it or its absence. And the judge nods slightly, signaling she understands exactly what that means. And when the accountant steps down, the damage is already done. Sap, break, side, sag, break, sag, break. Because now the courtroom knows this isn't just about broken hearts. It's about broken systems. And as if that isn't enough, the prosecution announces the next witness, someone unexpected, a former family friend who once lived close enough to see what the cameras didn't. And when she takes the stand, her testimony is quieter but no less cutting, describing nights when one wife cried while another was celebrated, moments when favoritism wasn't subtle but obvious. And Kody's irritation grows visible now, his control slipping as he shifts, sighs, whispers to his attorney, because this isn't how he imagined this going. And Robin finally speaks under her breath, barely audible, but the tension around her suggests she feels the walls closing in. And right here, the audience feels the emotional pivot, because sympathy begins to fracture into questions. And the judge calls another short pause, but this time no one relaxes, because everyone senses what's coming next. The announcement that Robin herself will be called to testify in the following session, and when her name is mentioned, she freezes, her hand mid-wipe of her cheek, eyes wide, because for years she's been seen as the protected one, the emotional center, the misunderstood wife. But now, she's about to step into a space where tears won't be enough, where words will be weighed instead of felt. And as court adjourns for the day, Kody finally stands, running a hand through his hair. The image of control he once projected, now cracked beyond repair. And as he walks out past the wives he once led, none of them follow, because whatever family this once was no longer moves as one. And the audience is left with one burning question that keeps them watching. When Robin takes the stand, will she defend the story they told the world? Or will she tell the truth they hid from it? When court resumes the next morning, the room feels tighter, like the walls have inched closer overnight. And everyone knows why. Because today Robin Brown takes the stand, and as she walks forward, her steps are careful, measured, almost rehearsed. Yet her hands betray her, fingers twisting together as she sits, eyes already glossy before a single question is asked, and the oath echoes in the room like a challenge rather than a formality. Because this is the moment where the image the audience has seen for years collides head-on with sworn truth, and the prosecution begins softly, asking Robin about her entrance into the family, about her hopes, her expectations, and she answers in a trembling voice, talking about love, unity, wanting a safe place for her children. And for a moment, the room almost relaxes, because this sounds familiar, comforting even, like the early seasons everyone remembers. But then the questions shift, subtly at first, asking about her relationship with Kody compared to the other wives. And Robin hesitates just a beat too long before saying she never wanted special treatment, that she only accepted what was given. And this is the first crack the audience notices, because denial arrives before accusation. And when the attorney asks whether she was aware of financial imbalances between households, Robin's breath catches. She says she wasn't involved in those decisions, that Kody handled the logistics. And as she speaks, the camera of the listener cuts to Janelle, whose expression doesn't change. Because she's heard this distancing before, and the prosecution presses gently, asking whether Robin ever benefited from decisions that disadvantaged the others. And Robin's voice tightens as she insists she never asked for more, never wanted to take from anyone. But then a document is placed in front of her, a printed approval form with dates that match moments already testified to. And Robin stares at it as if it's written in a language she doesn't recognize. And the attorney asks her to read the highlighted section aloud. And when she does, her voice drops almost to a whisper, because it confirms that she was consulted, not just informed. And this is where the tension spikes, because the story she's telling no longer matches the record. And the courtroom feels the shift immediately. The judge leans forward slightly. Kody's jaw tightens, and Robin begins to cry in earnest now, saying she trusted Kody, that she believed he was being fair, that she didn't know the impact of those decisions. And the prosecution doesn't attack her for crying, instead letting the silence stretch, because silence is heavier than accusation. And then comes the question that changes everything, asking whether Robin ever expressed concern that Kody spent more time at her home than at the others. And Robin shakes her head at first, then stops, then nods slowly, admitting that she noticed it, but believed it was temporary, situational. And this moment pulls the audience deeper, because it's not villainy they're hearing. It's self-justification. And when asked whether she spoke up for the other wives, Robin's answer is quiet, almost inaudible, saying she didn't want to cause conflict. And Christine exhales sharply at that, the sound cutting through the room like a blade. Because conflict is exactly what silence creates. And the prosecution moves on, asking Robin how she perceived the emotional states of the other wives during the later years. And Robin describes tension, distance, resentment, framing it as something that grew naturally. But the attorney interrupts, asking whether Robin ever questioned why the resentment seemed directed primarily at her and Kody. And Robin freezes, eyes darting instinctively toward Kody, who looks back at her for the first time in hours. And in that look is panic, not support. And this is where viewers feel the emotional stakes surge, because alliances are starting to crack in real time. And Robin finally answers that she felt blamed unfairly, that she believed the others were jealous. And that word hangs in the air, heavy and ugly. And Janelle uncrosses her arms for the first time, leaning forward, eyes narrowed, because now it's personal. And the prosecution seizes the moment, asking whether Robin believes jealousy excuses emotional neglect. And Robin stammers, saying no, that wasn't what she meant. But the damage is done, because the courtroom has heard the underlying belief. And when cross-examination begins, Kody's attorney steps in aggressively, framing Robin as a scapegoat, a woman caught in the middle of collapsing relationships. And Robin leans into that narrative, describing herself as misunderstood, overwhelmed, trying to hold the family together. And for a brief moment, sympathy flickers again. Strong, because her pain is real, even if her role is complicated. And this is the emotional whiplash that keeps viewers locked in, unsure who to believe. And then the attorney asks Robin whether she ever encouraged Kody to repair his relationships with the other wives. And Robin nods quickly, saying yes, many times. But the follow-up question asks when, specifically. And Robin can't answer. Not with dates, not with examples, and the silence that follows is devastating. Because intention without action is suddenly exposed, and the judge watches closely now. Pen paused above the page, and when Robin finally steps down, her face is blotchy, her shoulders slumped. The image of emotional authority she once held, now fragile and uncertain. And Kody reaches for her instinctively before stopping himself, aware of the eyes on him. And this pause speaks louder than any testimony, because it shows a man realizing he can't save everyone at once. And the prosecution isn't finished, because they call one more witness, a therapist who once worked with the family, and the energy shifts again, from accusation to analysis. And the therapist speaks calmly, professionally, describing patterns of favoritism, avoidance, and emotional withdrawal, explaining how plural dynamics amplify harm when leadership lacks balance. And when asked whether the family structure could have survived with equitable behavior, the therapist answers yes, but only if accountability existed. And Kody stiffens at that word, accountability, because it's the one thing he's avoided all day. And this is where the audience feels the truth settling in, that love didn't destroy this family, avoidance did. And as the therapist steps down, the judge announces that Kody himself will testify next, and the room reacts instantly, murmurs rippling despite the gavel, because this is the moment everyone has been waiting for. The patriarch finally under oath, and Kody sits frozen, eyes forward, breathing shallow, because he knows that once he takes that stand, there will be no wives to shield him, no faith-based language to hide behind, only questions he can no longer deflect. And as court adjourns for the day, he remains seated long after everyone else stands, staring at the empty witness chair, knowing that tomorrow he will have to face not just the court, but the truth of who he's been. And the audience is left suspended in tension, asking the question that drives them to the next session. When Kody finally speaks, will he admit his failures, or will he blame the women who trusted him most? The courtroom is unnaturally quiet when Kody Brown finally takes the stand, the kind of silence that feels intentional, like everyone is holding their breath at once. And as he raises his right hand, the confidence he once carried so easily on camera is nowhere to be found, replaced instead by tight shoulders and eyes that blink a little too often. And when he sits, the witness chair creaks under his weight, a small sound that somehow feels symbolic, because for the first time, the structure he built is audibly straining, and the prosecution doesn't rush him, letting the pause stretch, because tension is sharper than accusation. And when the first question comes, it's deceptively simple, asking Kody to describe his role in the family. And he launches into familiar territory, words flowing easily now, about leadership, responsibility, faith, unity. And for a moment, it almost feels like the old Kody is back, the man who could talk his way through conflict with conviction and charm. But this is where the audience senses the trap forming, because practiced speeches don't hold up well under oath, and the attorney gently interrupts. Private, 10 ceases, asking whether leadership also meant accountability, and Kody hesitates, correcting himself, saying of course it did, but that every marriage had its own challenges. And then the questions narrow, focusing on time, asking how Kody decided where to spend his nights. And Kody shifts in his seat, explaining logistics, children's needs, emotional demands, and as he talks, his words start to tangle. And when the attorney asks whether Robin received more of his time in the later years, Kody answers defensively, saying she needed him more, that her household was more stable, and the judge raises an eyebrow slightly, because stability rarely requires more maintenance than dysfunction. And Christine's lips press together as she listens, not angry anymore, just tired. And the prosecution presses on, asking whether Kody believed the other wives' needs diminished simply because they became less vocal, and Kody bristles at that, saying they withdrew, that they shut him out. And this is the moment viewers feel frustration boil, because responsibility is being redirected instead of owned. And when asked whether he ever considered that his absence caused that withdrawal, Kody pauses too long, and in that pause is every unanswered text, every empty night, every promise postponed. And finally, he says he did the best he could, and the attorney doesn't argue, instead asking whether doing one's best absolves harm caused. And the silence that follows is deafening, because there is no safe answer. And Kody clears his throat, saying harm wasn't intentional. And the attorney nods, replying that intention doesn't erase impact. And suddenly, this isn't about Kody versus the wives. It's about a universal truth everyone recognizes. And this is where the story deepens, because viewers see their own experiences reflected back at them. And the prosecution shifts to finances, bringing back the accountant's testimony, asking Kody to explain disparities. And Kody becomes more animated now, defensive, insisting decisions were made for the good of the family, that sacrifices were necessary. And Janelle shakes her head slightly, not in anger, but disbelief, because she knows how often family meant someone else. And when asked why concerns raised by Janelle weren't addressed fully, Kody claims communication broke down, that resentment poisoned cooperation. And the attorney asks whose job it was to repair that breakdown, and Kody's answer is automatic, saying it was mutual. But the attorney counters by reminding the court that leadership carries disproportionate responsibility. And the judge nods again, her pen finally moving, and this subtle validation sends a ripple through the room. And then comes the most dangerous line of questioning, the one about favoritism. And Kody stiffens visibly, denying it outright, saying love isn't a pie, that affection can't be measured. But the attorney doesn't argue emotion, instead listing actions, nights spent, resources allocated, decisions prioritized, and asks whether those patterns could reasonably be interpreted as favoritism. And Kody's voice rises slightly as he says people see what they want to see. And that accusation hangs heavy, because it shifts blame onto perception rather than behavior. And Robin watches him now with an expression that isn't relief or pride, but worry. Bruh, unparentheses, B, bruh, E, bruh, 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 bruh. Because this isn't the defense she hoped for. And when the attorney asks whether Kody ever considered stepping back from leadership to reassess balance, Kody scoffs softly, saying the family needed structure. And this is the turning point where viewers realize control was mistaken for care. And then the prosecution brings Mary into the narrative, asking Kody whether he emotionally disengaged from her long before their marriage officially ended. And Kody's jaw tightens, because this is personal, and he answers carefully, saying relationships evolve, that sometimes love changes form. And the attorney asks whether Mary was aware of that change when it happened. And Kody doesn't answer immediately. And that hesitation is louder than any confession. And Mary looks down at her hands because she already knows the answer. And this quiet heartbreak lands harder than any shouting match. And when cross-examination begins, Kody's attorney tries to regain ground, framing Kody as a man overwhelmed by impossible expectations, pulled apart by conflicting needs, and for a moment, sympathy resurfaces, because it's true that plural marriage magnifies strain. But then the attorney asks Kody whether he regrets anything, and the room stills again, because regret is the one thing that could soften everything. And Kody pauses, looking at the floor, then up at the judge, then finally toward the wives, and says he regrets that they didn't try harder to stay unified. And the reaction is immediate. Christine's breath catches. Janelle closes her eyes. Mary's shoulders slump. Because even now, even here, responsibility is shared instead of owned. And this is the line that makes viewers shake their heads. Because growth was within reach and still avoided. And the prosecution declines further questions, confident the point has been made. And as Kody steps down, the image of authority he once commanded is fractured, not destroyed, but undeniably altered. And the judge calls for another recess, but this time the break feels like a countdown. Because everyone knows what comes next. Closing arguments, judgments, consequences. And as Kody returns to his seat, Robin reaches for his hand and he lets her. But the gesture feels different now. Less protective, more desperate. Like two people realizing too late that solidarity doesn't erase accountability. And the audience is left suspended in heavy anticipation. Because the question that now looms is unavoidable. When the judge weighs everything she's heard, will this family's story end in legal resolution, or in emotional reckoning far deeper than any verdict? As the courtroom reconvenes for what everyone knows is the beginning of the end, the atmosphere shifts from confrontation to consequence, and the weight of everything said so far settles heavily on every bench, every breath, because now it's time for closing arguments. The moment when stories harden into positions and the future begins to take shape. And the prosecution rises first. P. Brer, walking slowly, deliberately, as if pacing the emotional distance between what this family claimed to be and what the evidence revealed. And they speak, not with anger, but with precision, reminding the court that this case was never about whether plural marriage itself could work, but whether leadership without accountability inevitably fractures those it claims to protect. And as they recount Christine's testimony, Janelle's documentation, Mary's quiet confession, and Robin's contradictions, the courtroom feels like it's reliving the trial in fast motion, every crack widening just a little more. And when the attorney turns toward Kody and says that power unexamined always becomes power abused, Kody stiffens. Because this is no longer about specific actions. It's about pattern. And this is where the audience feels the story shift from drama to reckoning. Because patterns are harder to deny than moments. And a prosecution finishes by asking the judge to consider not just financial restitution or custodial fairness, but acknowledgement. Because without acknowledgement, there can be no real resolution. And as they sit, the defense stands, attempting to reframe the narrative one last time, portraying Kody as a man crushed beneath impossible expectations, navigating emotional minefields without a map. And for a moment, the argument almost lands, because empathy is a powerful thing. But then the defense makes a critical misstep, suggesting that the wives' independence contributed to the family's collapse, and the temperature in the room drops instantly. Christine's eyes flash. Janelle's jaw tightens. Mary looks away, because even now the suggestion lingers that autonomy was the problem, not neglect. And this subtle blame reignites the emotional fire the defense hoped to extinguish. And when the defense concludes, the judge calls for silence, leaning back in her chair, fingers steepled. And in that pause, the entire story feels suspended, because Everyone understands that while legal judgments can be appealed, emotional truths cannot. And the judge begins to speak slowly, carefully, acknowledging the complexity of plural family dynamics while making it clear that complexity does not excuse harm. And as she addresses each wife in turn, her words feel less like legal analysis and more like recognition, validating Christine's decision to leave, affirming Janelle's concerns, honoring Mary's endurance. And when she turns to Robin, her tone softens but sharpens simultaneously, noting that benefit without responsibility still carries consequence. And Robin's tears return, quieter now, less defensive, because this time they're paired with understanding. And then the judge addresses Kody directly, and the room holds its breath again, because this is the moment he's been avoiding since the first gavel fell. And she tells him that leadership without self-reflection becomes entitlement, that authority without empathy becomes isolation, and that the court cannot mandate emotional growth but can recognize its absence. And this is the moment viewers feel a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness, because truth has been spoken, but damage remains. And as the judge outlines her preliminary findings, signaling financial recalibrations, custodial considerations, and a formal acknowledgement of inequitable treatment, P.P.P.P.P.P.P.P.P.P.P. Page strong. The legal outcome becomes clear enough, but what lingers longer is the emotional aftermath. The judge adds one final remark, saying that families do not fall apart in moments of explosion, but in years of quiet dismissal. And that sentence lands heavier than any ruling, and Kody lowers his head, not in defeat, but in something closer to recognition. Because for the first time, no one is asking him to fix it, only to see it. And as court adjourns for the day, the wives rise separately, no longer bound by performance or pretense. Christine walking with steady purpose, Janelle with calm resolve, Mary with fragile but genuine relief, and Robin lingering behind, uncertain where she belongs, now that the narrative has shifted. And this is where the audience feels the emotional aftershock, realizing that winning in court doesn't mean healing at home. And as Kody remains seated again, alone this time, staring at the empty witness stand, the silence around him feels earned, not imposed, because for the first time in his life, there is no one left to speak for him, and the unspoken question pulses beneath the surface, driving viewers forward into what comes next. Now that the truth has been acknowledged, what happens when these people must rebuild their lives without the roles that once defined them? The days after the court's preliminary findings feel strangely hollow, like the echo after a door slams shut, and the story shifts away from polished wood and legal language into quieter spaces where consequences actually live. Because now the Browns are no longer reacting to questions, but to themselves, and the camera of the listener moves first to Christine, packing boxes in a sunlit room that already feels lighter without the weight of expectation. Her movements calm but deliberate, each item placed away like a boundary being drawn. And she thinks about how leaving once felt like failure, but now feels like alignment, like finally standing upright after years of bending. And when a friend asks if she's angry, she pauses, realizing anger requires energy she no longer wants to give. Because what she feels instead is clarity, and this is the moment that pulls viewers in deeper. Because freedom doesn't arrive loudly, it arrives quietly and unmistakably. And the scene shifts to Janelle, sitting at a kitchen table with papers spread out. Not legal documents this time, but plans, budgets, possibilities. Her mind moving forward instead of backward, because for her healing looks like structure, autonomy. Knowing that her stability will no longer depend on someone else's approval, and she reflects on how often she was labeled strong, as if strength meant silence. Realizing now that strength is simply the courage to stop absorbing imbalance, and this realization lands softly but powerfully. Strong. Break, 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 rest, break. Because so many viewers recognize themselves in it. And then there's Mary, alone in a quiet room, the silence louder for her than anyone else, because her loss isn't just a marriage. It's time, identity, the version of herself she kept alive by believing endurance would eventually be rewarded. And she allows herself to grieve without defending it, without reframing it as growth or destiny, just grief as it is, raw and unpolished. And this pause in the story is where emotion deepens, because unresolved love often hurts more than betrayal. And the narrative moves to Robin, whose world feels suddenly unstable in a way she never expected. Because for years, she believed proximity to power meant protection. But now, she sits in a living room that feels too quiet, too exposed, replaying her testimony, the questions she didn't answer well. The moment she stayed silent when speaking might have changed everything. And she tells herself she was trying to keep the peace, but a small, persistent voice asks whose peace she was protecting. And this is where the audience feels the discomfort settle in. Because good intentions don't erase harmful outcomes. And Kody is last, as always, alone in a space that once revolved around him. The absence of noise louder than conflict ever was. And he paces, replays conversations, searches for moments where things went wrong, still tempted to locate a single turning point instead of accepting a pattern. And he feels anger rise, then defensiveness, then something unfamiliar beneath it all, a quiet sense of irrelevance, because leadership once gave him purpose, and now it feels stripped away, leaving him face to face with himself without an audience. And this internal unraveling grips viewers, because it's not punishment they're witnessing. It's reckoning. And as days turn into weeks, interactions between the former spouses become brief, transactional, emotionally cautious, because everyone is learning new boundaries in real time. And when they cross paths at a required mediation session, the tension isn't explosive. It's restrained, which somehow makes it heavier, because there are things they could say but choose not to. Understanding that not every truth needs to be spoken aloud to be real. And Christine speaks calmly about co-parenting logistics. Janelle asks direct questions. Mary listens more than she talks. Robin struggles to find where her voice fits now. And Kody watches, unsettled by how little he's needed in this room. And this subtle shift keeps viewers locked in, because power doesn't disappear, it dissolves. And later, alone again, Kody flips through old footage on his phone. Moments of laughter, declarations of unity, promises made confidently into cameras. And for the first time, he doesn't feel defensive watching them. He feels distant, like he's observing someone else's life. And that distance frightens him more than anger ever did. _strong, bracket, 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 bracket. Because it suggests change might be irreversible, and this emotional undercurrent pulls the audience closer, sensing a transformation that isn't finished yet. And as the section closes, each person stands on the edge of something new, not healed, not resolved, but undeniably changed. And the question that lingers isn't who is right or wrong anymore. It's whether growth can exist without reconciliation, and whether letting go of a shared story means losing everything, or finally making space for something honest to begin. As the final court date approaches for the judge's conclusive ruling, the emotional tension resurfaces in a quieter but sharper form, because now everyone understands that the legal outcome is almost secondary to what has already shifted inside them. And the story moves through the days leading up to that moment like a slow burn, beginning with Christine attending a small gathering of friends where laughter comes easily now, surprising even her, and when someone casually asks if she ever misses the old family, she pauses, realizing she doesn't miss the structure. She misses the version of herself she thought she had to sacrifice to keep it alive. And this realization hooks viewers deeply, because it reframes loss as recovery rather than failure. And the narrative drifts to Janelle, who is finalizing independent plans with quiet confidence. No dramatic declarations, just steady movement forward. And she reflects on how often she was told she was low maintenance, understanding now that it was never a compliment. It was permission for neglect. And this line resonates strongly because so many people recognize how praise can disguise dismissal. And then Mary's path unfolds more slowly, her journey marked by hesitation and reflection. Because rebuilding after emotional limbo requires unlearning patience itself. And she meets with a counselor, speaking honestly for the first time without editing herself to be palatable, admitting she stayed because she believed loyalty would eventually turn into love. And this moment grips the audience emotionally, because unreturned loyalty is one of the hardest truths to confront. And the story shifts again to Robin, whose internal conflict intensifies as the final ruling looms, because she senses that public sympathy is no longer guaranteed. And for the first time, she questions whether her tears were always understood as pain, or sometimes interpreted as power. And this thought unsettles her deeply, because it forces her to acknowledge a role she never consciously chose, but undeniably occupied. And this internal questioning holds viewers. Because accountability without villainization feels uncomfortably real. And Kody's arc reaches its most fragile point here, as he prepares a statement for the court that no one explicitly asked for, but he feels compelled to write, sitting alone late at night, pen hovering over paper, struggling to decide whether honesty or self-protection will define him now. And as he drafts and redrafts, crossing out justifications and softening language, he begins to recognize how often he framed control as leadership, certainty as strength, and avoidance as peacekeeping. And this self-recognition becomes the emotional spine of the section. Because viewers aren't watching redemption yet, only awareness. And when the final day arrives, the courtroom is less crowded, but more intense, because those present understand that something irreversible has already happened. And the judge delivers her final ruling with clarity and firmness, formalizing financial adjustments, outlining boundaries, and closing the legal chapter decisively. But what matters most isn't the ruling itself. It's the silence that follows, because no one rushes to react. And in that stillness, the audience feels the full weight of finality. And this pause functions as a powerful retention beat, because it forces reflection rather than resolution. And when the judge asks if anyone has final remarks, Kody unexpectedly stands, voice steady but subdued, and speaks briefly, not to argue, not to defend, but to acknowledge that he mistook authority for connection and certainty for trust. And while his words don't undo the past, they land differently than everything he said before. And the wives listen without interruption, without visible reaction, because this moment isn't about forgiveness. It's about witnessing. And this restrained exchange keeps viewers emotionally locked in, because growth without applause feels authentic. And as court adjourns for the final time, there is no dramatic exit. No confrontation in the hallway, just separate paths taken deliberately. And outside, sunlight feels almost intrusive after weeks of emotional gravity, and each person steps into it carrying different weights. Christine with relief, Janelle with resolve, Mary with cautious hope, Robin with uncertainty, and Kody with a fragile sense of humility. And this shared but separate ending holds the audience, because it mirrors real-life conclusions that don't tie neatly. And as the section closes, the lingering question isn't whether the family will ever reunite, but whether understanding, once reached, is enough to change what comes next. Or if some lessons arrive only after the cost has already been paid. Period. The story settles into its final movement, not with spectacle, but with reflection. Because after the court doors close and the paperwork is filed away, what remains is the quieter, harder work of living with what was revealed. And the narrative opens on small moments that feel ordinary, yet charged with meaning. Christine waking up in a home that finally feels like hers. Sunlight spilling across the floor as she makes coffee without waiting for anyone else's schedule. Realizing that peace doesn't announce itself, it simply stays. And she smiles at the simplicity of it, understanding that happiness doesn't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. And this gentle calm pulls the audience in, because it shows that healing often looks boring to those still trapped in chaos. And the scene shifts to Janelle, taking a walk alone, thinking about how stability once meant holding things together for everyone else. But now it means choosing herself without apology, and she feels grounded, not victorious, just steady. And this quiet confidence resonates deeply, because viewers recognize the power of choosing consistency over conflict. And Mary's ending unfolds more slowly, more tenderly, as she stands in front of a mirror one evening, studying a woman she spent years trying to make smaller, more patient, more acceptable. And for the first time, she doesn't ask whether she's enough for someone else. She asks whether someone else is enough for her. And that question lingers in the room like a promise she's finally ready to keep. And this introspective beat holds attention, because self-worth reclaimed late still counts, and Robin's path remains the most uncertain, her days filled with reflection and discomfort as she replays moments she once justified easily, now understanding that being protected came at a cost she didn't fully acknowledge. And she sits with that knowledge without rushing to reframe it, because for the first time she understands that growth requires staying with the discomfort long enough for it to teach you something. And this restraint keeps viewers engaged, because accountability without collapse feels rare and real. And Kody's ending is the quietest of all, stripped of speeches and explanations, as he walks alone through familiar spaces that no longer revolve around him. Noticing details he once ignored, the echo of his own footsteps, the absence of voices that once waited for his direction. And he realizes that leadership built on being needed eventually collapses when others learn to stand on their own. And that realization doesn't crush him, it humbles him. Because for the first time he understands that influence is not the same as connection. And this moment lands heavily, because viewers witness a man confronting the cost of mistaking control for love. And as time passes, there is no dramatic reunion, no explosive fallout, just distance that slowly becomes acceptance, and the family story that once demanded to be told loudly now exists in quieter truths, each person carrying their own version forward. And the narrator's voice softens as it reflects on what this courtroom drama ultimately revealed. Not villains and heroes, but people shaped by choices they repeated until they became patterns, and patterns that went unchallenged until they broke something essential. And this reflection acts as a final retention beat, because it reframes the entire journey as a cautionary truth rather than a scandal. And the closing image lingers on the empty courtroom. Benches cleared, lights dimmed, a space that witnessed everything yet keeps nothing, reminding the audience that judgment may end stories, but understanding begins new ones. And the final thought settles gently but firmly, that families don't fall apart because love disappears. They fall apart because listening does. And when listening returns, it's often too late to save the structure, but just in time to save the people inside it. And this emotional resolution holds the viewer until the very last second. And before the story fully fades, the narrator turns directly to the audience with a quiet but powerful invitation, asking whether accountability should come before forgiveness or after it, whether love survives without fairness, and whether silence is ever truly neutral. And this final call keeps engagement alive beyond the video, because the sister wives story doesn't really end here. It continues in every relationship where power goes unchecked and voices go unheard. So now I want to know from you, after everything you've heard, who do you believe changed the most? And who still has the most to answer for? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective is part of this story too.